Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another interesting, insightful, and damn good episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. I help men just create better relationships, be more connected to themselves, be more intimately connected, more sexually connected to their own sexual energy and to the sexual energy of their partners, as well as, create the sort of dating lives that they deeply want, deeply deserve, by getting over patterns and dysfunctions that are stopping them from being the men they truly want to be. That was quite a mouthful. Today's episode is a really, really good episode. Really enjoyed recording this with Dominick, a really amazing guy. He runs the Great Man Within. We had some wonderful conversation. It's a really riveting conversation. I would even say, a few of I give early access to podcast episodes to my coaching clients. It's something that I don't always talk about, but I do. And, quite a few of them listened to it and absolutely loved it, really enjoyed what they heard. And there's some incredibly useful stuff in here around emotions, around emotional mastery. Talking about how men live this double life. They're one person in public, one person at home in their mind. We talk about depression and emotional anxiety. Dominick really shares his personal story, which is a really remarkable story of what he's gone through and how he's come out the other side as well. We talk about how we interpret our emotions and how we manage them. How can we come to a point of being able to manage our emotions well? How can we be able to respond to our emotions instead of reacting to our emotions? How can we gain wisdom from the emotions we have? Maybe you feel a lot of anger, and it's like, how can you talk to that emotion and learn from it? Dominick takes you through a wonderful process in how to do that. How we can communicate better relationships, stuff about judgment, as well as how Dominick really managed emotionally moving from his corporate career, very successful corporate career, into a purpose-led life. And this was an important question that came from one of my coaching clients. You're going to really love this one. Whatever you're a man, you're a woman, whatever, you're going to really love this episode because it's going to really ring true for your own experience of what you've dealt with when it comes emotionally. It definitely did for me, as you hear from the episode. I've got some workshops coming up as always. I've got a tantra workshop I'm running with a wonderful partner, Orsa. That's happening on the 20th of March. You can find the details in the show notes. I'm also starting off a group coaching program around masculinity, intimacy, and relationships. That's open to men. It's open to single men in relationship. And it's going to be a real deep dive into those topics. These are the topics I talk about most of all. Masculinity being leadership, being connection, being, confidence, all those things, as well as the other areas. And I think it's going to be, it's amazing. I already had a few people sign up. So if it's something you're interested in, please, drop me an email, hello@theauthenticman.net. Or you can find me on Instagram @theauthenticman_. You can have a conversation about whether this program is right for you, and you can apply to be on that as well. And it's coming up in June and July. I'll probably mention it a few more times, but it's going to be in limited numbers, and I'm already filling the spots. So if you're interested, speak to me now. Don't leave it to the last minute, because I know men have this thing of leaving some things to the last minute, thinking it's going to be open available. And I've had men miss out on coaching with me as well as workshops because they've left it too late. So don't do that. So without further ado, we can get into the episode. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back with another episode. I'm back with another conversation that I'm incredibly looking forward to, to talk about a topic that I talk about quite a lot, and that's, about emotions and men and expression and processing. And I have a wonderful guest with me today, a man whose posts, again, just leapt out to me on Instagram. And, you read some posts and they're talking about men's work, and they're talking about how men connect and how men can connect to their partners more deeply. And sometimes they hit home so much because they're talking about things that you've experienced, that you felt, and that you know to be deeply true from experience and through going through the trenches, the difficulties, and coming out the other side able to connect deeply with not just yourself but all the people that you meet through your life. I'd like to introduce Dominick Quartuccio, who is a men's coach and leader of men's communities, which I love. That leader of men's communities. We just need more men who are leading men's communities in such a way.
David, thanks for the introduction. Just way about you. I know we've only started speaking a few minutes before we hit the record button, but we've already had a number of laughs. We've already connected on a number of things around the men's work world. You told me the story about that cool hat that you're wearing, that Charlotte Hornets hat that you had when you were a kid and you found it on eBay years later, and now you're wearing it. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today and seeing if we can capture the minds and hearts of some of the men who are listening to your show.
Awesome, awesome. And how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. You and I spoke, so we're recording this at noon my time, and I have not done an ounce of work until this is the first quote work that we're doing today, because these are the nights that I run my men's masterminds. They go till 10 o'clock. And I'm like, you know what? Thursdays from now on, I'm not doing any work until noon. And the last 4 or 5 hours, I've just done breath work. I've meditated. I've taken a walk around the city. I've done some journaling, and just, I'm ready to go, man. So you've got the clearest, most open, well-rested version of me that I will be today.
Thank you. Thank you. It sounds like a beautiful, beautiful morning. Beautiful way to start the day.
Heck yeah. And it's in New York City, is just starting to turn the weather a little bit here. We had a 50-degree weather morning this morning, which after, weeks of 10 degrees, 8 degrees, this
Mm,
is beautiful.
feels like spring is just peeking through the time of new beginnings.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome, awesome. And I'd love to hear your story about how you came to do the work that you do now, to come to be leading men in such a way.
Great. So maybe a little context of what I do right now, and then the backstory will really help crystallize it. So right now I run what's called the Great Man Within community. We have a series of masterminds, 3 masterminds for men who are here to discover and live the great man that's within them. Right. So it's predicated on this belief that we all have 2 lives that we live: the current life that we live, and then the unlived life of that great man within us. Right. The fullest potential version of who you are, who you become when you're in alignment with your passion and purpose. And because so many men are lone wolfing their lives, the lone wolf is the man who's mentally, emotionally, spiritually going about his life on his own, which can be really isolating and lonely and frustrating. No one's there to celebrate your successes. No one's in the foxhole with you when life gets tough. That we find that men have been craving community with other men who are seeking to become the best version of themselves. So the Great Man Within community is a series of masterminds where guys are discovering who their best version is alongside other men. So that's my purpose, my passion. I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. How did I get here? So I was the proverbial lone wolf. About 12 years ago, I was that guy who on the surface projected strength. I was performing really well in work. I was in a corporate financial services career doing quite well, rising through the ranks at a young age, making good money, and had a pretty good social scene, was doing well with women romantically, at least well on the surface. And behind the scenes, I was completely lost, numb, didn't know what I was feeling emotionally. Um, and no one really knew what was going on in my inner world. I never let anyone get behind the wall where I kept all my emotions. What ended up happening back in 2013 was I hit my first bottom, or my my deepest bottom, which was I ended up in Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery. And I spent 4 years in a 12-step recovery program around sex addiction, which is something I'm more than happy to talk about. I talk about it all the time, well, not as much recently, but I run a podcast called the Great Man Within Podcast. Some of the earliest episodes are dedicated to going through my story of the making of a sex addict, like
Mm.
how does one become a sex addict? It's an addiction that a lot of people don't really understand. It's got a lot of stigma around it. It's not quite as accepted as people who have gone through Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. But that was when I hit my bottom and was forced to look at my inner world and my upbringing and the belief systems and my patterns and behaviors around sexuality and pornography use and women. That was my outlet for all of these emotions I didn't know how to feel. When I started to unravel that, I found therapy, I found coaching, I found community, I found breath work, meditation, mindfulness, all of the things, and my life was reborn. And when I found, in the most beautiful of ways, and when I started to change, the people around me started to notice. And eventually I knew that I needed to bring this to more people in my life, specifically men in my life. And 5.5 years ago, I left, coming up on 6 years ago now. Wow. 6 years ago, I left the corporate space to do this work. And that's why I'm here today.
Wow. Wow. What a story. That's incredible to, you know, often it's through our kind of greatest pain that we really find what we're really meant to do, when we kind of hit the bottom, as you said, kind of the bottom of the barrel. We can, there's only ways up, I know that it's quite a cliche, but it's like you could really see it's like, well, if I'm down here and I'm alive, I'm getting by, I'm surviving, I can actually reach some even higher heights from this point because I know I can survive at this point.
It's just funny you say that. There's a man in one of our masterminds. He's become a really good friend of mine. And he said, hitting bottom hits different when you know you can get back up from it.
Mm.
And back then I didn't know if I could get back up from it because I didn't have anybody surrounding me. I didn't have my community built. I didn't have other guys that I could talk to about this stuff. It was always, and this is a common phenomenon, maybe you can relate to this from your own life or from the men that you coach. you know Anything emotional, I went to women for.
Mm.
I didn't share any of my emotional stuff. So when I hit my bottom and I ended up in Sex Addicts Anonymous, and what precipitated that was, I was 33 or 34 years old. For the first time in my life, I'd fallen in love with a woman.
Mm.
Like, I dated women all my life, but I'd never let them get close enough to my inner world to really be able to fall in love. I heard, this concept of love was so foreign to me. Like, I heard songs sung about love. I'd seen movies made about love, but I didn't know what that felt like. It was always like an outsider looking in of this feeling of what does it feel like to be in love? And this one woman who I'd fallen in love with, um, as she got closer and closer to me, I felt both this incredible sense of connection to her and this terror of she's going to find out who I really am. And the more that fear came up in me, the more I would turn to my addictive behaviors like sexting other women, sometimes reaching out and sleeping with other women. And it was December 28th of 2012 when she and I went to we were flying to Boulder, Colorado, where we were going to spend, the new year. We check into the hotel, the St. Julian Hotel in Boulder, Colorado. I go to the bathroom. I come out. She's holding my cell phone. She had gone through it and seen messages to other women. And she was horrified and shocked. And it was, like terrible what she had to experience, these secrets that I've been keeping from her. And David, here's the thing, like I never thought myself capable of being that man. Like I never thought that I could cheat on somebody, but that's exactly what I did to the one person I'd finally fallen in love with. That was the thing that brought the walls down between the public facing Dominick that I'd created and the secret Dominick. I had these two lives. I think a lot of men can relate to this. The
Mm,
public facing Dominick that like the world wanted to see, that would be praised and accepted. But then this like secret part of me that had all these other behaviors that felt really true, like these desires, these feel, but like felt unlovable, felt I couldn't share them with anybody. I felt guilt and shame. Secrecy is born in shame. And those two worlds came crashing down, and it was just me. And that's where I had to pick up the rubble. And I started that journey by myself because I didn't have anybody in my life that I'd let in to know what was really going on. And that felt lonely.
mm. Wow. Wow. And it's so true. So many men live these double lives, because we've believed that there's these elements of who we are that no one will ever want to see and experience. So we keep tucking them away. We keep tucking them away. And, I've seen it with men I've worked with, even friends, where there's almost like two separate human beings that can come out.
Yes.
If you see them in a different place and you look at them and you go, that looks like that person I know, but they're even moving differently. They're acting slightly differently. And then you see them and you're like, oh, what's going on here? They're like, hey. And that, it's like a different human being because we've tucked so much of ourselves away into this shadow human that we don't want anyone to see, that it literally becomes its own being, its own force.
I mean, so the perfect example of that is I'm now watching the documentary series on Bill Cosby,
Mm.
right? And it's a show called We Need to Talk About Cosby on Showtime. I grew up on Bill Cosby, right? I mean, he
Yes.
was the man. He was my generation's television teacher. Like he was,
Yeah.
you could do no wrong. He was incredible. And yet for decades, he was drugging and raping women.
Yeah.
And how do we have one human being with such extreme behaviors where, I mean, you watch him on television and he's beautiful with kids. He's hilarious. He's funny. He's charming. He's intelligent. He's witty. He's patient. He's compassionate. And then there's this other side of him that is a predator in the worst of
Mm.
ways. And it's like, how can these two things exist in one human being? And I oftentimes find that we can learn when we explore the extremes. Do you know what I'm
Mm.
saying? And Bill
Yeah.
Cosby is an example of an extreme where it's almost impossible for us to fathom that these two entities can exist inside of the same human being. But that I believe is possible. Bill Cosby is possible when we do what most men do, which is we create these compartments inside of ourselves. We silo, we segregate, right? We create these separate worlds inside of us because when we're boys, we're taught that the feelings that we feel are not okay to feel them or not okay to express them, not okay to show them. And so we compartmentalize. And then we praise compartmentalization as it's a as if it were a virtue. And we praise boys when they don't feel feelings, to show up stoic and to show up strong, even when they're getting the shit kicked out of them or they've been abused or bullied or whatever it is. And so when these compartments exist, when they start at a young age, like mine did, they start small, but over decades of time, it can create, like in my case, this perfectly curated, here's a guy that your parents would want to meet, here's the guy that's leading in business, that's the guy you want to put out in front of everyone in the organization to speak and have that cohesive message. Behind the scenes, sex addict. And I think a lot of men, and that builds up over time and those two worlds get further and further apart. I think a lot of men can relate to the idea of, I do have this secret world that I stuff all the things that aren't okay, or I've been told they're not okay, or that have been unlovable, or I've been shamed for in the past. And I keep feeding that And someday, like, it feels like it's going to come crashing down on me, or at the very worst, I don't live an integrated life ever. And that's a lonely.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that kind of often for guys, it's like they're living almost waiting to be found out. They're like waiting
Yeah.
for someone to, they're kind of walking around like, okay, one day someone's going to come across all this and what's going to happen. And the problem in that is that it forces one to even push those things further away, to hide them even better, to be even more pristine and perfect, right? Because we get praised for being really pristine and perfect. You know, the company love you, your friends love you, your family think you're great, people praise you when you're not around. So you keep getting this message that, oh, if I show up like this, I get praise and people want me. And then you hear from other people about behaviors that other people have done, like, oh, so and so, you know, oh, he slept with this girl and he never saw her again. That's so terrible. And you sit and you hear this, and it reinforces for you this idea that what these things you're doing that you're hiding are bad and wrong, and people won't accept you for them, right? And it reinforces those emotions that you need to hide away. That shame is something that you need to hide away. That guilt, anger, upset, even sadness. It's like we need to keep those away out of public because the public don't want to know about those. It forces us to keep doing that because we get this reinforcement constantly, and it's just such a insidious kind of message that's happening in so many levels of communication throughout society and between men as well.
You're so right, man. And I think it's important, to even give some specific examples of how this can show up, because the example I gave can be as extreme around sex addiction, 12-step program. And then Bill Cosby's even further extreme, where he's a predator. But if we were to take it to something that maybe is seemingly more innocuous, a lot of men have this, the what's it called, where you think, the imposter syndrome,
Mm.
right? So it's, hey, for example, I've got guys in my masterminds who are leading businesses that do, $1 billion in revenue, like in large
Wow.
Fortune 50 companies, who are, who are like, on the top of the charts for succession planning, and, can be CEOs and these kinds of things. And in confidence, they'll say, but I wonder if anyone were to actually get behind the hood here, would the whole deck of cards, would the house of cards come crumbling down, because I don't really know what I'm doing. And
Mm.
what drives me is fear of being found out, fear of being poked too hard, fear of being exposed. And over the course of time, they're very successful. They can be very successful, but inside they're exhausted.
Mhm.
Inside, they're constantly questioning. Inside, they feel like a fraud. And I think a lot of guys can relate to that idea of, well, man, I project one thing. My outside world doesn't exactly match my inside world. And God forbid if anyone finds out. And over time, you carry that game long enough, and then fewer and fewer people actually, no one actually knows what's really going on in there. Then again, it can create that feeling of isolation, and the fear grows further that if I'm ever going to be found out. So that's why it's so important that, David, we're talking about this conversation of, like, how do we rekindle that relationship with our emotional inner lives,
Mm.
and why does it matter? We've already hit on some of these reasons why it matters, because we've become strangers to ourselves. We create separate siloed identities. Our outside world doesn't match our inside world. Another big one is, like, when you're only working from the neck up. What I mean by that is, like, when you shut off your emotions, everything is in the head. I see these guys with big ass brains walking around all day long. Like, I'm surrounded by them, right? I worked in 15 years of financial services, lots of really smart dudes, but you ask them what they're feeling, they have no idea what they're feeling. And then any decision that they need to make, whether it's in romantic partnership or strategic business partnership, everything is a long, churning, grinding calculation in their head that burns so many calories, versus just like, and then they end up in shitty situations because they didn't know how to like for a person, they get into bad romantic relationships. They get into bad business partnerships with people that they can't trust or people that betray them or people that didn't have what it took. If only they had like access to their heart or to their gut and to their instinct to be like, that feels fishy.
Mm.
And Jeff Bezos is the guy who said it. I mean, I think he's the richest man in the world on the day of this recording. He goes, all of my biggest decisions in life have come from heart, intuition, instinct, and guts.
Wow.
Like if you have data, by all means, rely on the data. But if you look at the business that he built, and whatever you think about Jeff Bezos from a humanitarian standpoint, you have to admire the fact that like he has built a freaking empire. And Amazon was going into territories that have no data, right?
Mm.
It's like you're creating something that hasn't existed before. So to make those decisions to go to those places, he relied on heart, intuition, instinct, and guts. And those decisions can happen quite quickly, confidence and conviction. And a lot of guys don't know how to do that. And rightfully so, if you've spent your entire life shutting off your emotional channels.
Mm, yeah, and it's incredible that a man like Jeff Bezos, a man that many a successful man who is aiming for that kind of material success is aiming towards, can look and go, oh, this is a man who is sees the importance of connecting to his heart and his gut, and who is probably also open to talking about the fact that he hasn't always felt great as well, right? I see this a lot in the world, is that we praise these men who are stoic and doing well, but when they talk about their low moments, we almost tuck them away. We almost ignore them, right? We almost go, oh, so and so was battling with depression. Okay, cool. And we tuck that away and we forget about it. And we only focus on the really amazing, perfection looking things. And it's almost like we also, what we talked about before is creating that two separate people. We almost do that to public figures as well. We remove some of those elements of them because we don't want to look at those things
Mm.
because of and I wonder if it's a lot to do with the fact that as men, we're so uncomfortable with especially what I call like the heavier emotions, the fear, the anger, frustration, all those things, that we don't even want to really recognize those things in other people, because that would shine a mirror and a light back onto
Mm.
ourselves and force us to have to start to look at those emotions in ourselves as well.
Yeah, it's really well said, David. And one of the men that I really admire who's spoken about his journey with depression and anxiety was one of my first teachers into this space, which was Tim Ferriss.
Mm.
Tim Ferriss was like back in 2010, I think I read his book, The 4 Hour Work Week. And that was really about like, productivity and lifestyle design and think about your life a little bit differently, which was awesome. And it broke my world open. But Tim Ferriss is someone who, at the center of his life for his entire life has grappled with, I believe it's like depression and anxiety. And he'll go into really dark holes and spaces that can feel like torment. And, he speaks about his psychedelic journeys that have helped him to face some of that stuff, suicidal tendencies, which is why now he's such a proponent of helping to get psychedelic medicines, into clinical trials and to be used in therapeutic settings. And, he's normalizing discussions around this, which I think are amazing, especially when you look at someone like him, who, for many men, myself included, you know, as- he's an aspirational figure, someone who's built a life of his own design. He's doing lots of cool shit. He's surrounded by really cool people. He's financially got his things together. And so I aspire, to kind of be my own version of that and talk very openly about my mental health journey and the places that I've gone to. And I'm even I'm going through my own version of a mental health journey now, because the last year of my life, my physical body hasn't been operating at optimal levels. And quite frankly, David, like it's been perplexing. Like I've my body's felt weak, it's felt tired, it's felt fatigued. And I've been a lifelong athlete, and never taken better from a sleep perspective, a nutrition perspective, a recovery, meditation, breath work. I got community. I'm doing all the things, all of the things, saunas, cold plunges, cold showers. I do all of it. And my body is feeling weak, tired. And I keep trying to push myself, and it's having an impact on my mental health. And I wake up and I'm lethargic and tired, and then I beat myself up, and then my mind starts playing tricks on me, and then I feel trapped inside this world. And I've just recently spoken about that to my communities and gotten incredible support, where now I'm just starting to create space, to take time away from the workouts, to remove things from my calendars, to not take as many calls with people who need my time and energy, because I need to fill my tank. And so as I've been doing that, other people in my space who are looking at me and going, wow, if this guy, who's leader of community, who's building lots of stuff, who's putting content out all the time, if he needs and can speak about taking time for himself, then maybe I can do that too. It's just living by living, putting out the example that we would want others to emulate. And right now, I'm in a difficult stage of my journey, and I'm sharing about it openly in a way that I have never before.
Incredible. Because it's it's not easy to share these things when we're going through the pain and the difficulty, because we're feeling the pain as well, and to share that, as we said before, is like we're not shown that that is the what we should be doing. We're shown that if we share our pain and our difficulty, other people will attack us or see us as weak.
Right.
But it's this vulnerability that I'm really hearing in you, is to just say, this is where I'm at, this is what I need, this is what I'm struggling with, like, this is who I am.
Right. Right. I think one of the things that I've wanted to find on my journey is just to be okay with who I am, right? Is to be accepting, loving who I am. And so many of us, I think we talked about this, touched on this a little bit earlier, when we were kids, when we were in our family systems, there were bits and pieces of us that were praised and rewarded. And there were other bits and pieces of us that weren't accepted, weren't allowed, or punished. And so we, put all those little pieces of us that weren't accepted, that weren't loved, that were punished, put in a box, shoved away, compartmentalized. And then we kind of create this caricature of ourselves that is love, that is praise, it's accepted, whatever. And and then we become disintegrated. We know we're living a lie on some unconscious level. And and then over time, as we drift further and further away from ourselves, it starts to feel less and less true. And so I think many of the guys who are listening to your podcast, who are coming to my communities, listening to my podcast, joining my communities, are the guys who are like, I know I have way more potential than what I'm fulfilling right now. I
Mm.
don't know exactly what that is or how to get to it, but I have a suspicion that there's more out there for me. And when they make that realization and they start to embark on that inner journey, they start to see all these doors inside themselves that they shut off, all these compartments that they've siloed. And once those walls start to dissolve, it can be painful. I mean, I'm sure you've been
Mm.
through your own parcel. It can be really fucking painful to bring down those walls. Stuff comes up. Your system has to recalibrate and reconstitute itself. And I'm going through the next, peeling layer of the onion. And this has been rough. Like this last year of my life, even as I've been elevating, it has been harder and more emotionally and spiritually trying than when I went through Sex Addicts Anonymous, where
Wow.
when I hit a bottom. Um, this has been the most challenging, but it feels like this is the stuff that's really, really, like all the low hanging fruit, man. I picked that stuff away, and now I'm confronting the real stuff, and it's been tough, but I know there's just another layer.
I imagine that you've had to face some really heavy emotions in these times. And I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you talked about, when we have these sorts of emotions, anger, frustration, um, fear, you know, all the kind of heavy stuff that as men we all always try and avoid, is that there's a lesson there that's trying to tell you something. And I
Right.
imagine that's something you've really experienced in the last year as well.
100%, man. These emotions of fear and anger. Like, so growing up, I was taught that anger was something that was like wrong or
Mm.
bad. If
Yeah.
I were to feel anger, then maybe uh, I'm indulging in something that I shouldn't be, or that I'm not evolved enough, or I'm not spiritual enough, or I'm not, I grew up in a religious, I've got 7 years of Catholic schooling, that I'm not Catholic enough, I'm not God fearing enough. There's all of that. Anger is a human emotion, and it's one that's really misunderstood, especially when it comes to men, because we also get these mixed emotions of, you're not allowed to feel emotions, guys. But if you're going to feel something, if you're going to be, if you're going to express something, then anger is something you're allowed to express because it's masculine, it's manly. And so we got all these really weird behaviors with anger. You see these guys who are walking around all kind of tense and, like, buttoned up and constricted. And then they'll either explode, and that anger will, explode all over, detonate all over someone else, whether it's in physical violence or emotional violence. Then there's other guys who jump on their own emotional grenade of anger, and it detonates internally, and they
Mm.
swallow that all the time, and they're exhausted. The way that manifests is they become either cynical, passive aggressive, and sarcastic, because like just kind of like that anger leaks out, or they become really withdrawn because the pain of like not being able to express that anger or feel it, they detach from feeling altogether. They disengage from life and from people, don't speak up, don't set boundaries, let themselves get walked on. And so we all have our own version of how we deal with this particular emotion of anger. And like you were saying, David, the practice that I've learned to really just like inspect my emotions is, I have this little practice called, the board of directors of my emotions. And it's a meditation that I created where I like to picture myself sitting down as like the CEO of a boardroom table, and there's 50 chairs sitting around this big table. I'm the chairman, and each of these chairs represent different emotions, like, and who shows up that day? I don't know. Maybe I'll sit down and I'll be like, oh, there's anger. He's early and he's loud. I could see him bouncing in his seat. In another chair, there's maybe sadness. Another chair, there's maybe creativity, curiosity, happiness, gratitude, frustration, resentment, jealousy. Like all these chairs. And I'll sit down, and each of these emotions have the frame of, this emotion carries information for me,
Mm.
valuable information. And because I'm the chairman, I hold the gavel. I do not let anger take over the boardroom meeting, right? I just say, anger, like, come on up, come on up. Like, tell me what we're angry about, or let me feel what we're angry about, or maybe I don't even know what we're angry about. Let me just feel the anger. What is the message that you're carrying for me? And sometimes I can get really brutal because I don't know what it's carrying. It comes through my body. I want to punch something. Sometimes I'll just want to scream, and I'll do it.
Mm.
This morning was a great example of that, man. Like, I wasn't even in a formal meditation with this boardroom, but I was in the shower. I was feeling really stuck. I switched the hot shower to cold shower. That blast of cold shower kicked something up inside of me that was like really angry. And I let out a scream in the shower, which is not typical. Like, I don't do this, I'm not screaming in my shower. And I pounded on the wall, and whatever was in there, it just moved through me. And sometimes I don't even need to know what it's about. But when it moved through me and I was able to kind of take some breaths and cool off from that, or, dry off from that shower, I felt a spaciousness. My mind seemed to be quieter. And I was like, is there anything else in here that I need to know? Is there anything else here that wants to be communicated? Nope, we're good. And then I was able to move on. So just creating that space for these emotions to come up, to get curious around what information they're carrying, and then sometimes just let them move on and pass through and carry on with their day.
Mm. Super powerful, incredibly powerful, because the emotions, they're there. It's like they're signposting us often to something that's unresolved, something that we need to give our attention to. And it's not always what we think it is. Like sometimes, as you said, with anger, sometimes we think, that means that someone's done something and it's made me angry. but maybe the anger is pointing you towards something that really matters to you or is important for you
Yeah.
to look at or look after, or someone you neglected. And it's like having a dialogue with these parts of ourselves from a place of like presence, not allowing it to, as you said, take the gavel. And I would say to people, it's like, don't let your emotions hijack you. Don't let them hijack you and take you
Yeah.
where they want to go. Allow yourself to be present with them, you know, almost observe them, feel them, see how they're moving through your body, have a conversation. Like you said, have a conversation, like get into dialogue, get to know them. You know, we have a saying in, well, you know, in the soccer, as football is like, you know, the manager puts his arm around some players. He puts his arm around some players, and some players he kicks them up the arse, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, put your arm around them and say, what's up? Like sadness, what's there for you? Like, what are you trying to tell me? What's the message here? And it takes a level of patience and presence, like the process I'm hearing you say. And also it's just like being open to being that kind of intimate and vulnerable with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. And I think another phrase that was really helpful for me, I think I learned this in the 12-step program, was emotions are like children. You don't want them driving your car, but you don't want to stuff them in the trunk either. Right.
Mm,
so, emotions like children, you don't want them driving your car. You don't want them stuffed in the trunk either. They do deserve a space in, they deserve a seat with a seatbelt, like to be cared for. And like you said, sometimes they need an arm around them. Sometimes they need a little kick in the pants. But for most guys, we've been taught to not feel. We've been told that, to not get too high, to not get too low is a virtue. And of course, there's certain times and places where, if you're on the battlefield, and I'm talking about like, like say real military, like real to military situations. If you're on the battlefield, someone gets shot, you can't sit there and grieve and express and feel your emotions. Like you need to be in that moment, crisis situation, deal with that. But we also see that when those emotions don't get dealt with after the battle has been waged and now we're in peacetime, a lot of our veterans come home with severe cases of PTSD, which is emotions that haven't been faced, right? And this is going back to extreme situations. I think we can learn a lot from looking at extreme situations. And last year, I was actually a part of working with a group of world class military veterans who were Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Recon Unit veterans who have seen battle. And a lot of these guys had either lost people in war, some of them had lost their own limbs in war, or dealing with emotional and physical PTSD. We brought them together for like a 3-month program that I facilitated to then bring them down to an ayahuasca retreat facility in Costa Rica called Soltara, so they could do the medicine and work through some of their stuff. And we can see these guys are the elite of the elite in terms of like their physical makeup, their emotional and mental makeup, and how much they are carrying, how much pain and anguish and guilt, resentment and fear and all of it they're carrying, because we don't have the processes and the structures in place when they come back from those extraordinary crucibles where their lives are on the line to then process that. We in our own regular lives, maybe we're not going to extreme situations like that, but we've experienced losses of loved ones, losses of jobs, the anxiety of the past 2 years of uncertainty, or being in a household with kids and a spouse and feeling suffocated, and the tension of where's the money going to come from. If that stuff doesn't have its own space to be dealt with, then where does it go? It's stuffed inside of us. It's clogging up our energy flow. We become constricted. We become, and it manifests very differently in all of us. For me, I had my addiction. Some people have alcoholism. Other people eat, emotionally eat. Other people gamble or become workaholics. It manifests in a variety of different ways, unless we have like coaches like you that we can process it with, communities of men like the men who come to my world to develop emotional fluency. And that's an actual practice, that has 5 steps of how to become emotionally fluent. to work through this stuff so we can reclaim our sovereignty around our emotions.
Mm, that was really powerful, really, because you know, like you said, we've all gone through these last couple of years where we're all having to deal with a lot of emotions coming up because we're sitting at home. You know, most people have done a lot of sitting at home in the last couple of years. Um, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I had a lot of influx of men coming to me, you know, kind of the back end, midway through 2020, back end of 2020, who were like, oh my God, I've just spent so much time with myself and I've realized how dysfunctional my life is. And you're like, really? And then they, you know, they tell you, they're really honest, and they're like, I'm so happy that this pandemic happened. You know,
Yeah.
I've spoken to a lot of people, like I have never have spent so much time with myself and had to sit with myself alone without distractions of drink, drugs, work, women, and had to sit with what I'm feeling and the uncomfortability of being me. I'll never forget a man said that to me. He said,
Mm,
I had to sit with the uncomfortability of being me
mm,
day in, day out, day in, day out. And he was like, I felt so uncomfortable that I was like, I need to make some change. I need to create some transformation
yeah.
in my life. And it's incredibly powerful when we kind of sit still and we sit with the feeling of just being us, and we're like, this isn't this. I don't like this. I'm uncomfortable with this. And if we don't learn tools to kind of put words to the feeling, you know, maybe feel them as well, find ways to express them, and whether it's somatic practices to kind of let them pass through us and let go, they just kind of stick around, and we become like it's almost like a bucket with a lid on it. We just, you know, we're so used to keeping it on. And I imagine
Mm.
with the veterans, they have such a capacity to hold
Yes.
and such a capacity to keep the lid on,
Yes.
that for them to pry it open, it would have been really some kind of dedicated work and creating safety for them.
That's a beautiful way that you put it, David. And I think it's important to praise the capacity that these men, including ourselves, have built to hold certain things, because that capacity can absolutely be used for, if you're a father and you're holding the emotional, there's emotional weight going on in your family. Maybe a kid's going through mental health stuff, maybe a spouse is going through, maybe there's financial burden. The capacity to hold that and be able to operate at a high level is extraordinary and very useful, right? The thing though is you're not meant to hold that weight into eternity. You're not
Mm,
meant to hold that weight forever. It's just kind of like you're not meant to go to the gym and work out for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You're meant to do that for periods of time and then rest and recover. So, like, what's that? To use the analogy of a gym, it's like, okay, you've been pumping weight, holding the emotional stuff. Where's your recovery time? Where's your ice bath? Where's your massage? Where's your, lounging on the couch emotionally? It's not disappearing into like a weekend bender in Vegas. Like that lets off a little bit of steam, but when you come back, like that stuff is still there. You're still carrying it. And I think that yeah, I think that what you said about building that capacity is a virtue, but when we hold it for too long, it becomes the burden.
mm,
And that's why we need the tools to find a way to put that burden down. Which is why, again, you as a coach and men having you as a coach are so important, to be able to come to you and be able to put that down, or to really resolve that, or come into communities of guys where they're like, okay, these guys understand what I'm dealing with. They speak my language. I've never felt so seen, heard, or understood. I've never felt so safe opening up. That's actually one thing I failed to mention before, David, was when I went to Sex Addicts Anonymous, I walked into that room, like to my 12-step meeting, which I went, for every Sunday for 4 years. I walked into this room with like 35, 40 strange guys, where I was ashamed and horrified that my life had come to this. And that if anyone had seen me walking into that meeting, like anyone from my real life, and see me walking into that meeting, they're like, their vision of me would have been shattered. When I walked into those room of men, I did what I always did when I walked into a room of men. I sized them all up, right? I was like, who's the alpha dog in here? Where's the guy that's my biggest threat? Who's the one calling the shots? Where are the guys that maybe like, I feel strong and superior to? It's like this calculation that I wasn't even doing consciously, but built up over a lifetime of, as a guy, we walk in and we armor up, because there's always a threat. There's someone who's a bully. They want to see what you're made of. Like you never walk into a group of guys and are just accepted. You always got to put
Mm,
on something, right?
mm,
This is my experience, and I love groups of men, right? I've always had groups of men in my life that I've been super close to, but there's always in competitive sports and fraternity and you name it. And in the financial services world, sales, I was in a sales environment. So there was always that, putting an armor up and projecting. But when I got into those rooms of Sex Addicts Anonymous, I was surrounded by guys that like weren't competing with me, weren't comparing themselves to me. They wanted me to put down my bullshit of like, everything's okay. I've got it all together. They wanted to hear the real me of what like landed me there. Why was I there? Like, what were my behaviors? Like, and it took me 3 months, man, 3 months and my sponsor kicking me in the ass, being like, dude, you're competing with guys who are just trying to relate to you, like put it down. And when I finally started to share what was really going on in my inner world, then these guys, they praised me for that. I'd never been praised for that before. And when I finally started to realize, oh my God, I can talk about what's going on in here and be loved for it. In fact, this is the price of admission, like to be real, is the price of admission in here. Then my life started to change. Then I started to feel a lot more okay with myself. That uncomfortability about being with myself, like that your client had said to you, can relate to that 100%. And when I finally started to get comfortable with being myself, then I realized, oh, this is what men are missing. They can't go anywhere. We can't go anywhere and feel like it's safe to be fully me, to express fully me. So that's why I'm building the communities that I've got where guys can come together and be like, holy shit, you know, I'm closer to these group of men who I've known for 3 months than men I've known for 30 years.
yeah.
Who like, and that's not an uncommon phenomenon when you get the right group.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely been an experience I've had through men's retreats and men's groups is where when there's a space and there's a willingness of other men to probe, but not probe in a way that it's like pushy, but it's like you're here to open up, you're here to be vulnerable. The space is here. Use the space, you know, and a man starts to open up and it has the opposite effect that he assumes it will have. He's assuming that if I tell these men about my darkest ways of being, the darkest things I've done, or the things I'm ashamed of and I'm sad about, other people will look at me and they'll screw up their face and be like, oh my God, you're disgusting. But they sit and they go, thank you, brother, for sharing. And they clap and they go, thank you for this. That's really helped me. And it is this kind of moment of like, what the fuck? Really? Is
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
it, I'm gonna be accepted by these people for being this way? And it's 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 really transformative for a man to experience that. Like it really shifts his whole way of relating to other men. And there's another realm that I've experienced it, which I think for a lot of guys is also incredible, is inside of relationships. If we
Hmm.
find ourselves in a relationship where a partner is calling us forward to be open, to be vulnerable with who we are, and saying, I will accept all parts of you. Like you can bring the parts of you that you've thought in the past that you won't be accepted. And we bring those parts forward and we are still loved and cherished and looked after. It's like it completely reorganizes our brain and the way we relate to being in a relationship, from instead of being a place where, oh, I'm in this relationship with this woman or this man and I have to hide all these bits of me because they're not going to accept me, or I can't express my anger, I can't express sadness, or you know oh, I can express lust towards this person, but if I lust after anyone else, it's going to be, I'm going to be punished. When we're in a
yeah.
relationship and it's like, I will accept all those emotions. It's okay. Like you can share them with me. It just really can be a deeply healing experience for a man.
100%, man. I mean, I was that guy like pre Sex Addicts Anonymous. It was kind of like, well, here's what I'm allowed to show a woman, and then here are all the things that I feel that if I were ever to talk about, then she would be insecure, or she would judge me, or you know what I mean, or there would be friction, and then it'd be not worth it. Like those were all the things. And then, one of the things that I grappled with when I was leaving Sex Addicts Anonymous, or not leaving Sex Addicts Anonymous yet, but when I started dating after, the relationship I was in with that woman who I loved, I went into Sex Addicts Anonymous to repair that relationship and to work on myself. After about 8 or 9 months, I realized I was not in the right relationship. I was the one who walked away. When I finally got back into the dating world, I was terrified. I'm like, who's going to want to date someone who's a sex addict? Who's going to want that? Right. And what I ended up doing was, I made the commitment to saying, I never want to be secretive. I don't want to hide anymore, because that's what got me here. And I
Mm.
never want to do that again. So even if it's going to be difficult, I'm gonna put this stuff out on the surface, and I'm gonna be really truthful about it. And I remember going on my first date with a woman after, breaking up with that relationship and being, deep in Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery. I went on a date with a woman who I felt feelings for, and I was like, okay, we're gonna go out on multiple dates. And so I shared with her very early on. I'm like, hey, listen, I want you to know a part of my story. Here's where I'm at. I'm in Sex Addicts Anonymous recovery. Here's what that means. Here's what I'm working on. I understand that that may bring up some emotions for you. How do you feel? And I'll never forget, like, I remember the place we were at. I remember how she looked at me, and she smiled at me, and she was just like, thank you for telling me, you
Mhm.
know? And it opened up a beautiful emotional conversation with her, where we were able to get to some deep stuff. Down the line, like, certain fears and insecurities would come up for her because it was unfamiliar territory, but then we worked through that. Now, that's one way it could turn out. The other way it could have turned out was, like, she could have judged me, shut it down, never called me again, in which case that would have hurt. And at the same time, that's great, because that's not a partnership that I want to end up in anyway. Right. And I was just blessed. I was blessed with having my first experience be one of acceptance, because then it did show me that, oh, there are women out here who can handle that, who have been through their own stuff. And for any guy who's out there listening, and whether you're in a partnership or not, you know, these parts of you do deserve to be seen, right? They do deserve to be expressed. They do deserve to be loved, as long as you're working on them. That's the
Yeah.
caveat, right? That's that. And David, like, you just, yeah, you quickly said, because this is where guys get in trouble, is they're like, well, I was vulnerable, and I shared this thing, and then she judged me, and then she's lost her sexual attraction to me and whatever. And it's like, well, did you just turn her into a garbage bag and dump all your shit into her, and now you're not
Yeah.
doing anything about it? You're flopped on the couch and just crying into your sweatshirt and watching 7 hours of Netflix. Or are you going to therapy? Are you working with a coach? Are you joining a community? Like, you can't just cry about it. Part of it's crying about it, but the other part of it is, like, step up and do the work. And then
Mhm.
if you're doing the work, then of course those parts of you do deserve to be seen, loved, appreciated, and nurtured.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely speak from experience of that. When I was dating a number of years ago, I remember going on a date and I was telling the girl, and she was like, I really hate when men, they like emotionally shut down when something goes wrong. And I said, that's just something that I used to do a lot. And it's something that's still in my armory, but it's something I'm so aware of now that I know the signs to catch myself when it happens, because I know how frustrated I feel with myself when it happens. And I
Yep.
know how it impacts someone I'm with. It's a really horrible thing to experience. And this created a conversation where she was like, wow. And then she got really inquisitive. She was like, what sort of things would cause you to shut down? So we started talking about that. And then I said to her, I was like, what does it really feel like on the other side? And she's like, it feels like this. And, she was quite an anxious type. She was just like, I feel quite anxious. So I'm like, what's wrong? What have I done? Was, maybe the relationship will end. And she goes into catastrophizing.
Mm.
And what was really beautiful about this conversation was she was able to open up and share with me about her feelings on the topic. I led with my own feelings, but also showing clearly that I had the awareness of what was going on and what I wanted to do about it. but it meant that we both got more information and understanding about being in that sort of dynamic and what
Yeah.
goes on for both people, right?
Yeah.
And it was one of those conversations where we had the conversation and there was no judgment because there was no shame as well. I
Right.
said what I said from a place of like, I accept that I do this. So I wasn't also afraid of her judgment because when we're sitting there and sometimes we are worried about judgment with someone else, we're kind of like a boxer. We're waiting for whatever could come back at us.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I say was really lucky, and I just kind of heard, we I you know I remember the date never really went anywhere after that, but I left feeling like, you know, someone saw me. I allowed someone to see me. They saw me, and I feel happy that I showed those parts of who I am, and I can bring more of that into me, the me that I bring to the world.
I'm really curious because that's a beautiful story. I'm really curious what work you did leading up to that point that allowed you to open up in that way. Because I
Mm.
know, right when we're at the early stages of, starting to kind of speak about ourselves and open up in brand new ways, that those first few steps are the scariest. And
Yes.
clearly you had a number of steps leading up to that point that allowed you to get to there. Like what work had you done before that point that allowed you to do that with such conviction?
Yeah. I think it started probably years before, but I hadn't fully integrated some of that work until, probably 5 or so years ago with a course I did. It was called Landmark Education. And
Sure.
they really get you to like have a look at your relationship with your parents. Like, and my dad is an emotionally distant man. He shuts down. If he gets upset, angry, he just stops talking. And it was through that I looked and I was just like, fuck, I'm just like my dad. The one thing I want to run away from is I'm like my dad.
Mm,
And that knowledge, and it took me many years to kind of create forgiveness towards him and understanding because it was his upbringing that created that. But then I went through a breakup. I went through a really difficult breakup when I was traveling in South America of my girlfriend of 4 years, where I just kept shutting down and we stopped communicating at all. And our relationship disintegrated before my eyes over the course of 6 months because of my
yeah.
inability to be open with what I wanted, what I needed, and not to be reactive to her. And after that, I was just like, I remember sitting in a hotel room in Bolivia in a place called Cusco, like crying and being like, I vowed to myself in that moment, I was like, I'm not going to let this happen again. I'm not going to let a relationship fall apart because of my inability to communicate like
Mm,
anything that I fear would upset her.
mm,
And it kind of set me on a journey. About a month later, I went and did ayahuasca myself in Peru. And what that really did for me was kind of clear away a lot of stagnant emotions that were just sitting on top of
yeah.
of me. I started to meditate quite a bit at this point, and I went out of my way to connect with everybody I met. You're traveling, you're going to a different hostel every couple of days, every few weeks. So I just went out of my way to just share my story, share who I was with people. So I'd be like, yeah, I've had a really tough time recently. I've just broken up with my ex partner, or someone would say, "How am I feeling?" And I say, "You know what? I'm not feeling that great today. I feel a bit low." Like those little things of doing that continuously and knowing that it was acceptable to bring those parts of me really culminated in an acceptance of me, but also an acceptance of other people's reactions to me. Very much in the way that you said that, oh, if someone reacts to me talking about doing plant medicine or going to therapy or having coaching or anything like that, and they like, oh, that's weird. I don't want to be around that. For me, it's just like, thank you. Thank you for your
Yep.
information. Thank you
Yep.
for letting me know early. I'm really
Yep.
happy you've told me this. Um, or from say a sexual side, I talk about, maybe, my early years, I was like really into having a lot of hookups and sex and stuff like that. And someone judging me for that, I'm like, cool, because I'm still a very sexually free person. I still believe in a lot of sexual freedom for people and sexual communication. And if that's not, you're not down with that, that's totally fine because I'm fine with both my
Yep.
own past and I'm fine with how I feel about it now. So it's like you don't look at it from a point of view of, oh my God, if they don't like that about me, that means there's something wrong with me.
Right.
It's like they're not into that. That's really great because I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with someone who is not down with that.
That's huge, man. I mean, the freedom that you brought into your life as a result of all that work is extraordinary, right? Like, I mean, think about the previous way of living, like before inner work is I need everyone to like me. And if they don't like a part of me, then there's something wrong with me. Therefore, then I mold myself to how other people expect me to be or want me to be. And then I surround myself with people who don't really like me and I'm walking on eggshells in some way. Versus after inner work, you get to just be authentically you and be very open about it. And then people come into your life who are like really vibing with that. And there are other people who come into your orbit who don't vibe with that and they quickly leave your orbit.
Mm,
That's like, that's the, and then being so okay with them leaving your orbit. And I just came back from I'm part of a mastermind of entrepreneurs who are, these guys are really, really interesting dudes. They're successful. A lot of them have their businesses really rocking in a place where I aspire to have my business being in a few years. And some of them, um, I don't vibe with at all. I don't
mm,
agree with the way that they run their lives, their business. I don't agree with the way that they market. I don't, like from an ethical standpoint. And in the past, I would have, been in a group like that where I would have felt like I would have needed to bend to them or I would have pedestaled them for their success and been like, well, maybe they have something that I don't, and maybe I should learn from them. And I would have gotten sucked into their vortex and I would have felt icky about it, but I wouldn't have known how to. So then I would have walked away from that experience feeling slimed, just kind of like coated with their gunk and feeling exhausted from those interactions. But now, yeah, I rub up against a couple of those guys and I'm like, wow, I don't want to be anything like you. And that's
mm,
okay. Like, you don't want to be anything like me. And it's not like I wish you ill. I certainly would love if, like, you did things differently, but I'm not here to invest my energy or time into probably something that you're not interested in talking about anyway. So I'm going to spend my time with these guys over here. And that is that is freedom. That's energizing. And growing up, David, for me, growing up as a people pleaser, and my parents, who are beautiful human beings, kind of taught me to kind of defer to other people's feelings and to make sure that everyone else feels comfortable and that they feel valued. And there's a certain superpower. Like, I've been able to take that and allow people to feel safe and seen. And I can bring diverse groups of people together and make everyone feel, welcomed. But the shadow side to that is losing myself.
mm,
And once I found myself and kept those other bits, now I feel grounded and I have boundaries to say, yeah, if you want to get close to me, if you want to be around me, then you better bring the energy, the generativity, the love, the compassion, the grace. Because if you're not down with that, then you're not getting close.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like it's having some sovereignty over your own energy and what you want to bring into your life, and not just believing that you have to um, please others so that you can get energy from them.
Bingo. Bingo. Yeah. And one form that's taking for me right now is, as my community has been growing and my social followers have been growing. And, when like, this from having a podcast and having social media, that a lot of people reach out to you. They DM you, they send messages, they want to pick your brain, they want to talk about a thing that's important to them. And that's just the social side of things. I've got 70 men in my masterminds who are, doing deep inner work with me. And then I got family members and friends. Like, people are always reaching, people that I care about, people who I love are always reaching out. I got a couple calls here while we were doing this, like, that I had to silence. And these are people who, like, I know need me, want me, like, need something from me. And I've been giving so much that it is starting to exhaust me. And I'm not able to give to my business in the way that I need to. I'm not able to fill my tank the way that I need to. I feel the burden. And so now it's like, okay, if if there are people in my life who can't understand that the role that I play now as a leader of men's community is, like, I got to be the lighthouse. I got to
Mm,
be the guy who's shining his light that can allow these ships that are sailing adrift at sea looking for a port to dock at and find community and find help. If they don't realize that that's my job, and when those ships come sailing up to sea, I can't take every individual person off their ship and take them to the barracks and clean them and feed them and then work through all their issues. I've got guys in my community who can help them do that. If people can't realize that my highest and best use is to be that lighthouse, and that I can't take every single individual phone call or be there on an individual level, if they can't understand that and then they hold resentment towards me for that being my thing, then that's the next layer of people that need to move on, you know? And it's not that I don't love you, but it's like my highest and best use. I can reach if I'm allowed. I know I can reach. I'm already reaching thousands. It'll soon be tens of thousands. I want it to be hundreds of thousands. I want it to eventually be more. I know I can do that. I know I can. Not in this way. And the people who understand that, who could support me and love me through that, those are the people that are going to be walking with me going forward. And the others who can't, sadly, like we'll be the next, that'll be kind of the next layer of the onion that peels off.
Oh, that is it's a really powerful lesson for me, just hearing that. But I imagine for listeners, it's like as we start to expand, the people around us somewhat have to adjust to the new person we're becoming. They have to start to see us as the new person we're trying to step into, and not just trying to help tens and 20s of people, that we can directly speak to. It's like we want to have a larger impact, an impact that ripples beyond us and beyond the people we even touch. It starts to touch their children or their cousins of those people. And it's like when we start to move into that sort of energy field, it's having people around you who look at you and go, I get it. I can see, I see you, I understand. And I send you love daily.
Yes.
Even when I don't hear from you.
Yes. Dude, that's exactly what I'm looking like. That's what I want, man. Like I almost got emotional. Like I almost get emotional here. I am getting emotional hearing that, because it's like, then they see me. You know what I mean? Like they get me. That's intimacy. That right there is true intimacy. And that's the cycle of life, right? It's as we grow, as we evolve, there are certain people who are going to grow and evolve with you. There are certain people who are not going to be able to. And there's something that I share in my teachings. I say there are three types of people in your life. I write about this in one of my books called On Purpose Leadership. Um, and they relate to you in one of three ways. There are people in your life who relate to you as the historical you, right? The David that you used to be, maybe the nickname that you had years ago, or the guy that you were 10 years ago. These are your childhood friends or people you used to work with. A lot of times it's your family members that they haven't really kind of moved on, and they want to pull you back to where they are because that's comfortable for them. They may not even know what they're doing consciously, but they can feel kind of like an anchor or, a parachute on your back when you're trying to run. And they're trying to keep you from where you're going because it's maybe threatening to them. They're maybe not even trying to do it ill-intentioned, but we all know what that feels like. The second type of person in your life relates to the here and now version of you. They see you, okay, this is who you are today, what you look like today. Here's your marital status. Here's your financial status. Here's your social media following. Maybe incrementally, they're able to see, oh, you're capable of a little bit more here or there. I'm comfortable with your growth as long as it's incremental. But they don't want things to move too quickly because that's not where they're at. And if you move too quickly, they may criticize or chop you down because it could threaten where they are and may feel bad about where they are. They may feel afraid of losing you. In my experience, 90 to 95% of people in your life fall into that here and now category, right? They're just kind of see the present day version of you. Then there's that third special type of person that relates to the highest version of you, right? This is, as we would call it in my communities, the great man within you. This is the person who sees you at your fullest potential. The person who speaks to the highest standard. This is the person who sees you when you're living your purpose, when you're fully integrated man, right? Not compartmentalized. the best version of you in relationship, the best version of you in finance, the best version of you in physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. And these people only speak to that part of you. So when you drop standard and try and, package up a C plus, effort and package it and position it like an A, they call you on your bullshit. They're like, no, 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 man. I know I see through that crap. Like, let me love you. Let's go. Let's play this game. And when you start to surround yourself with those kinds of people, then life starts to take off. Because we've all heard that adage of you're the average of the 5 people you spend your most time with. And if you're spending time with, that second category of here and now, or the first category of, the historical version of you, then you're not moving very quick. Surround yourself with the people who are seeing you as the highest version of you, speaking to the highest version of you. Holy shit, man, you are like on a rocket ship to that next level of who you are. And those are the people who get into my inner circle now.
Yeah, yeah. And they're the people who just hold you in that regard, and they can see beyond the now. They see the depth of your heart, the depth of who you are, and how that can and affect the world. Yeah, I almost have goosebumps as you're describing it, because I really know that feeling when you're speaking to someone like that, how they talk to you. They don't. It's almost like you're not talking to me. Are you talking to me? You're talking to me. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay. Because sometimes we have to catch up with that view of them. Sometimes if we feel like we're an imposter, or our self-confidence isn't where we'd like it to be, we don't even completely see the person that they are speaking to.
You nailed it. Like you totally nailed it. We have to catch up to that version because like we're stuck sometimes in our own fears and our own insecurities, in the neural pathways that are really well carved, in our habits and our patterns. And someone all of a sudden like, no, 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 you're up here. I see you up here, up here. This, you deserve a love that's like that. You deserve people in your life that are like this. And you're like, but wait a minute. But what about all of these things? What about all these things that are wrong with me? And, or what about the fear of? And we get caught up in that. But you surround yourself with enough people who are just like, no, 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 no. I'm not going to let you shrink. Here's a very specific example. One of the guys in one of my masterminds, he's a world-class massage therapist and recovery therapist for people who are, physical performers. He works with like athletes, and I've been working with him for 2 or 3 years. He's way undercharging what he's worth. He's like a master healer, and he's in our mastermind now. And he's like, I love what I do, but I don't want to do it 5 days a week. I'd rather do it 3 days a week. And I'd rather make more money in total than what I'm making, for these 5 days a week. And so we're all jackhammering him with this, dude, you are awesome. You deserve to double or triple your prices, to only work with people who are like dedicated to the work, who don't make excuses, who don't hem and haw, who give you energy, who are elite athletes that can actually be influencers and, and spread your word. That's all possible. It's all possible. And what he gets stuck on is kind of like but the market value of my services is this is what other people are charging. And if I charge this, other people will leave. And we have to jackhammer through all of that, right? And when there's 12 guys jackhammering away at him, then in the last week, he finally cracked through that layer, that self-imposed ceiling. He sent us a video message yesterday. He said, guys, kind of shitting my pants a little bit here, but I just went on my website and I just jacked up the rates of all my services. Anyone who wants to work with me from this point forward has to pay this new price. I'm scared, but the only way it's going to happen. He could have taken 2 years on his own trying to work on that shit by himself, and maybe like incrementally moved up a couple of, but with 12 guys bringing out their best jackhammers and just not allowing him to shrink, 1 week, right? And like David, in the work that you do, that's how I say this all the time. Personal development on your own as a lone wolf, it's slow, it's shallow, it's incomplete. But when you come into inner work with other guys, whether it's with a coach or in community, that is gasoline on the fire of your personal development.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I can't agree more. It's like lone wolfing it is not the cool way to do it, as many men think it is. It definitely it isn't, and it's not cool, and it doesn't make you more manly. I'm super aware that time has just raced away,
Wow, that was
and I
quick,
have
man.
and I have three more questions, and hopefully you can be answered really quickly, right?
Gotcha.
So I saw that you were in the corporate world and you switched over into doing this purpose led life, purpose led work with men. What did it feel like emotionally to make that switch?
Liberating. When I made the when I so I left February 28th of 2016, but I had known for 2 years. In February 2014, I'd made the decision that I was going to leave, and I needed the 2 years to like get myself emotionally prepared, financially prepared for it. And so by the time I left, there was no hesitation. There were no more fears. Like I was gone. Like there was no like the boats had been burned. I knew I was never going to come back. And I went on a 90-day excursion around the world, traveled, and then I came back on June 1st and then like started my next business. So for me, it was like a very clear celebration, kind of like, how you graduate college or graduate, like it's over. You're not going back. It's done. And then this new world awaited me.
Incredible. Yes. Second question. There's a question from one of my coaching clients. Is like, do you have any particular techniques for processing and releasing of old triggers that can be done like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna double click on the one that I shared before, which is that board of directors for your emotions,
Mm.
where it's if like if you don't know what you're feeling, or if you're feeling something like anger, fear, resentment, you're stuck, sitting down, picturing yourself as the CEO at the board of the table, holding the gavel with the chairs representing different emotions, and being like, anger, come forward. What's the message you have for me? Express yourself through me. Let me feel you. What information are you carrying? And if like I need to get up and go to my couch and beat the shit out of some pillows or scream into a pillow or punch something, I'll do that.
Mm.
Or if I need to, to sit here and cry, or if I need to feel overwhelming amounts of gratitude and bliss and joy that bring tears to my eyes, or if I just need to sit here in contentment and peace, like allow myself to do that. And then I'll go around the board and I'll see, are there any other emotions that like want to express itself to me? When it's done, I bang the gavel and the practice is over.
Incredible. And the last question. This one's from me. I see you're a fan of Lost, the series.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What do you
definitely.
what do you think? What do you think about the ending?
I've watched Lost 3 times, the entire season. I mean, that's like 120 episodes. I've watched that 3 times through.
Wow.
Lost and Breaking Bad are my two favorite shows of all time. I've watched Breaking Bad 3 times through as well. So when I get stuck on a show, I'm like on it. Um, Lost, its first season, its beginning is the best show you've ever seen in your life. It ends in a kind of confusing way. And without, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the end. But for me, as I watched the ending the third time, I felt the greatest sense of peace and closure that I did in any of the times watching it through, because these characters, I don't think I've ever fallen in love with characters in any show in a way that I had with Lost. Like their character development, I think, is a clinic. They've just done it better than anybody. And each of them found their own resolution. And each of them went through their own version of a hero's journey that like truly brought tears to my eyes. And when I finished watching it the third time through, this was like a year and a half ago during COVID, I was literally in mourning for 2 days. Like I was sad that the show was over and I grieved. Like I felt empty inside because I'd gone on such a beautiful journey. It's like watching someone pass away. So I ended up learning to love the ending of Lost, and not everyone does.
Yeah, I went spoil it for anyone. I remember for me, it felt like a real anti-climax. Like, you've taken that's it.
That's it. Breaking Bad is a different story. Breaking Bad had like the most perfect ending of all time, and it's considered to be like the show that just nailed it from start to finish. Lost didn't finish as strong as it started, but I think maybe even a part of like my own love for the show and what they did in those first few seasons is just clouding my judgment on the last and how it ended. But like, I have nothing but love for Lost.
Incredible, incredible. Thank you so much, Dominic, for your wisdom and humor and fun and sharing your story so openly, so passionately. I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can work with you, where they can, get in contact with your mastermind, join your mastermind, be part of that.
Awesome. So, if you want to if you want to get intro into the mastermind, come to DominickQ.com. And on DominickQ.com, which I'm sure you'll link somewhere in the show notes, you go to the mastermind section. There is in the mastermind section, there's a 7-minute video that has, here is everything you need to know about the digital mastermind, and a link to schedule time with one of our coaches to see if like you want to join the group. So everything is there from that perspective. If you want to get a real sense of the work that I put out, Instagram, I post daily, also at Dominick Q. And then the podcast, you get to go deep with me. That's called the Great Man Within podcast.
And I can definitely recommend the podcast. I've consumed quite a few episodes of that, and Dominic's Instagram is deeply inspiring, to me and to a lot of even my clients I recommend to.
Oh, thank you, man. And David, this has been a real pleasure. You have, like I said at the beginning, a really beautiful way about you of holding space and opening up conversations for depth. So thanks for the work that you're doing, man.
Thank you. And listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, if you've learned something, I'm sure myself and Dominic would love to hear what it is that you got, what it is you learned, what it is that you can implement into your life, which is the most important thing. Listening to podcasts is all well and good, but it's about action, taking action on what you learn, taking action on the insights that you get. But until next week, thank you very much. Ciao, ciao.